Hello students, Mr. Young here with Chapter 23, Lesson 1. This lesson is about the American Revolution. So this lesson is quite the summary. We go through the formation of the British colonies, the causes of the revolution, then the revolution itself, and then the formation of the Constitution of the United States. So pretty much it's your 8th grade history class, American Nation 1, the whole first marking period shoved into a single lesson. So take a deep breath. Let's do this. I'm excited. I get to wear my hat, my tri-cornered hat. Okay, so in the 1600s, you have some religious dissidents in Britain. You have people like the Puritans who want to purify the Anglican Church and want to make it better. You have the Separatists who pretty much gave up on the Anglican Church and wanted to separate. You had Quakers who are best described as very friendly pacifists. And they're all considered weirdos. So for varying reasons, be it to escape religious persecution, make some money, or start a grand new promised land, these groups, among others, began to set up British colonies in North America. Some notable colonies you'll learn about next year will be Jamestown in Virginia, the Lost Roanoke colony, which is quite the mystery. You've got the Boston, which is part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Plymouth with the Pilgrims. These are all things we'll learn about in more detail next year. But the short version is by the 1700s, there were 13 separate British colonies in North America. You can see them all here. Places like Pennsylvania, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Really much started Virginia and Massachusetts is where this sort of just spread. And we learn about the origins of each individual colony next year. That's actually the first chapter we study. For example, Georgia was originally set up for debtors, whereas like Massachusetts was more of a religious dissidents. Pennsylvania was originally William Penn. He was the governor. He was a Quaker. These are all fascinating things we'll learn about. So for a number of reasons, but a lot of it just being convenience, because the colonies were so far away from England, they had a certain degree of autonomous control. They had their own constitutions and governments with elections. So autonomous control means sort of like a measure of independence. So they had a little more control of government and more rights than their brethren across the ocean in England or anywhere else in Europe for that matter. Remember, a lot of them had monarchies or constitutional monarchies. So the American colonies became accustomed to various degrees of self-rule. Now Britain had control over the colonies in that they controlled who the colonies traded with. And under the Navigation Acts, all goods out of the British colonies had to go through Britain first. So basically the colonies had to trade with Britain, and then Britain would trade American goods with other countries. And as well, you had that all goods going into the colonies had to come through Britain first so they can be taxed and tariffed and so on and so forth. So in essence, the colonies' only trading partner was Britain. Now, the colonists had mixed feelings on this. On one hand, it guaranteed that they had a trading partner, but on the other hand, they couldn't, say, get the best prices or make the most money because they always had to go through Britain as a middleman. Now, Britain and France went to war in the late 1750s. Abroad in the world, it was called the 7 Years' War, but here in the United States, we call it the French and Indian War, and that's what they called it at the time in the colonies. In the colonies, it can be simplified to this: Britain and the colonies fought France and France's Native American allies in North America over a chunk of land called the Ohio River Valley, which is kind of where Pittsburgh is, and a little broader than that, but this general area is what was fought over. It's what started this war here in North America. England won, and as a result, France lost a great deal of its land in North America, all that New France area. England also spent a ton of money on this war, which it planned on making back by taxing the colonies. This is where things get salty. So Britain would essentially pass a tax to help pay off this debt from the French and Indian War, and the colonies would despise it. One major complaint was that the colonies didn't have any representation in Parliament, so when they made these taxes, the colonies didn't have a say. That's where you end up with no taxation without representation. So if a tax was passed, the colonies would essentially boycott that taxed good. So say they taxed tea or something like that, they just wouldn't buy any of that. As tensions mounted, more and more British troops were sent to the colonies to enforce the laws and these taxes. There ended up being clashes between the citizens and the British regulars, the redcoats. You end up with things like the Boston Massacre, as well as other incidents of civil disobedience. For example, the Boston Tea Party. You could tell that a lot of these events centered on Boston, Massachusetts. At this point, there were beginning to be whispers, talks of independence from Britain, which was treason. Coordination between 13 colonies to handle these issues, these mounting tensions, resulted in the First and Second Continental Congress, which essentially brought forth the declaration from the colonies that they no longer consider themselves a part of Britain. It's a pretty important document. You may have heard of it. It was called the Declaration of Independence. It was finalized on July 4th, 1776. So, even before the declaration had been signed, the fighting had started. You may have heard of the shot heard around the world at Lexington and Concord. It was just official now with the Declaration of Independence. Rebellion in the colonies was on. Now, the American Revolution itself, the fighting, is a whole chapter next year, but for now, know that the colonies were the big-time underdog, but had the home field advantage. A little bit of luck, a lot of tenacity, a sneak attack on Christmas, and help from France, which resulted in the United States breaking free from England and becoming its own country in 1783. Really, that's when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, and Britain recognized the United States as its own country. Now that leads us to the Constitution. The Constitution actually didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like, oh, we're free of Britain. Here's our rules and laws and our government. In fact, the first government of the USA was called the Articles of Confederation. The Articles were too weak, though, and for the most part were considered a failure. They didn't centralize enough power to the federal government, and they couldn't handle problems. It was more like a loose alliance of 13 different countries, the 13 colonies, than it was a single government in control of 13 sub-countries. You think of it that way. At that point, people were still more loyal to their state, be it Georgia or Massachusetts or Pennsylvania, than they were to the country as a whole. In 1787, the states sent representatives to Philadelphia to fix the Articles of Confederation, at which point they decided to scrap the whole Articles, and they ended up writing the Constitution itself. Now, many ideals that we commonly think of as American ideas are actually Enlightenment concepts that had great influence on our founding fathers, and so they used them for things like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and even the Articles, even though they stunk. For example, the very Revolution itself was supported by Locke's idea of social contract, which you will probably recall meant that the people had a right to overthrow the government if their natural rights were being violated. Another idea was popular sovereignty, which means the government receives its power from the people. It's not the government telling people what they're allowed to do. It's the people saying, this government is what you are allowed to do, sir. Also, the U.S. government is a limited government, meaning its power is limited to the powers given to it by the Constitution. Basically, it's all the people coming together and saying, government, this is what you're allowed to do. That's a lot like that whole popular sovereignty thing. These are all Enlightenment ideas, rule by the people. So that's it for the Revolution. There's actually a whole chapter next year on the Constitution. We'll learn all about it, and we'll learn more about these Enlightenment ideals. So you'll have a good start. So that's it for the American Revolution. Tomorrow we move to the French Revolution and Napoleon Bonaparte, things like that. You have a quiz. It's your basic quiz. Load up. 10 points, 5 multiple choice questions on everything that's in the lesson here. That was a summary. My lessons are essentially a summary of what's in the textbook, so if you'd like to learn a little bit more, you could go ahead and read the textbook. If you'd like to know even more than that, there's probably a really good video by Crash Course in History on YouTube. If you can look up YouTube on your computers with your silly eyeballs, and all kind of history videos on Mr. Young's YouTube. American Revolution Crash Course, U.S. History. There it is. Oh, yeah, right here. These are all great videos by Crash Course. And they are like, you can see 12-minute summaries of these events. So you could really learn a lot more if you're interested. So that's it for today. If you need anything, go ahead and contact me. Otherwise, hey, have a great day.